Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the cold, muddy world of medieval Europe, where some people spent their entire lives standing in freezing rivers, cleaning human waste out of city pits, or breathing smoke deep underground just to survive another winter. Forget knights and royal feasts for a moment. Behind every warm castle hall was someone exhausted, soaked, freezing, or covered in soot doing the jobs nobody else wanted. And honestly, most of us probably wouldn't last 3 days out there. So before we wander into the smoke, mud, and torchlight of tonight's story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these quiet medieval journeys. Now settle in, lower the lights, and let's travel back to the most uncomfortable jobs in medieval Europe. Hey guys, tonight you find yourself standing ankle-deep in mud beneath the shadow of a medieval town wall, while cold rain slips from the brim of your hood and down the back of your neck with almost artistic precision. The stone gate ahead rises through river mist like something half asleep, its watchfires flickering weakly against damp wind. And somewhere above you a guard coughs hard enough to sound personally offended by existence itself. The road behind has already disappeared into darkness and wagon ruts full of brown water, and your boots now weigh approximately the same as 2 respectable pigs. A mule nearby exhales steam into the freezing air while merchants huddle beneath patched cloaks beside carts loaded with onions, smoked fish, and damp wool. Smoke drifts from chimneys inside the walls, carrying that familiar mixture of peat, tallow, stale ale, and humanity that medieval travel brochures really oversold as rustic charm. You probably would not last a week out here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in tonight, feel free to comment your location and local time as well. There is something oddly comforting about imagining listeners scattered across the world while this old road stretches through the dark between all of you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The line at the town gate moves slowly enough to feel ceremonial. A bell somewhere inside the walls marks the evening hour from a monastery tower hidden behind rooftops and drifting smoke. Every few moments the gatekeeper waves another traveller through, after collecting tolls with the enthusiasm of a man who truly believes coins are a sacred form of conversation. You stamp warmth back into your feet and watch a farmer ahead of you argue over the fee for bringing 2 geese into town. The geese, meanwhile, remain completely united in their refusal to cooperate with civilization. One bites the farmer, the other bites the gatekeeper. Neither seems especially sorry. Rain taps softly against your hood while carts creak forward inch by inch. The walls themselves loom overhead, damp with moss and blackened by years of smoke. Rush torches crackle near the gate arch, sending long trembling shadows over oak doors reinforced with iron bands thick as your wrist. Beside you stands a narrow-faced cloth merchant with tired eyes and a beard full of rainwater. He smells faintly of sheep and vinegar. Fuller's, he mutters suddenly, as though continuing a conversation you never started. Worst job in Christendom. You glance at him. He nods toward a wagon piled high with rolled wool cloth waiting ahead in line. Town's full of them, stomping cloth all day in vats. Another man behind him snorts. Better than tanners? No, says the merchant with immediate conviction. Nothing worse than fullers. The argument settles into the comfortable rhythm of medieval complaining, which appears to function as both entertainment and emotional survival strategy. At last the line shuffles beneath the gatehouse itself. Water drips steadily from beams overhead. Guards wrapped in fur-lined cloaks inspect travellers with sleepy suspicion, while scribes at a narrow table scratch names and cargo marks onto wax tablets. Their fingers are stained black with ink despite the cold. One of the guards eyes your muddy boots. Road bad south of the river. Worse than bad, says the merchant before you can answer. Lost a wheel in a ditch near St. Odo's shrine. The guard nods solemnly. That ditch takes carts every winter, as though the ditch were a local lord collecting taxes. No one can quite agree whether St. Odo actually protects travellers or merely watches them suffer with professional interest. Some swear roadside shrines keep away thieves and wolves. Others quietly claim the saints only help people wealthy enough to afford proper candles. You pass beneath the archway into the town itself and immediately receive the full medieval urban experience directly into your senses all at once. Wet straw, horse dung, wood smoke, fish brine, boiled cabbage. Too many humans in too little space. Narrow lanes twist between timber houses leaning at questionable angles over the street, their upper floors jutting outward like gossiping old women listening for scandal. Water trickles through shallow gutters while townsfolk hurry past carrying baskets, firewood or tiny lanterns shielded against the wind. A dog emerges from beneath a cart and begins following you for reasons known only to itself and perhaps God. You continue deeper into the town beside the cloth merchant, whose name turns out to be Martin. He leads you through a marketplace already closing for the evening. Vendors pack away onions and turnips beneath canvas awnings, while a fishwife loudly accuses someone of cheating with weights. Somewhere nearby a baby cries. Somewhere farther away, two drunk men sing a hymn with alarming confidence and very little accuracy. The bell tolls again through the mist. Martin gestures ahead toward a broad stone building near the river. Warm yellow light glows faintly through shuttered windows. There, he says, Fuller's Hall. Even from the street you smell it before you see the vats. The odour drifts through rain and smoke with terrible determination. Sour, sharp, human, ancient. You hesitate. Martin grins in the weary manner of a man pleased not to work there himself. Told you. Inside the yard, workers stand calf-deep in large wooden troughs beneath hanging lanterns. Their tunics are soaked to the waist despite the cold. Rolls of wool cloth lie piled beside the vats, while others stomp rhythmically through murky liquid using bare feet hardened by years of labour. You watch one Fuller pause to rub his lower back before returning to the endless stepping motion. Back and forth, like monks trapped inside a miserable dance. The process itself sounds simple enough. Raw wool cloth arrives greasy with oil and dirt. The fullers soak it in liquids meant to clean and tighten the fibres. But the secret ingredient, the thing no cheerful market seller mentions while admiring expensive cloaks, is urine. Buckets of it, collected across the town, stored carefully, taxed in some places. The ammonia helps clean the wool, and so the workers spend long days stomping cloth in steaming vats of stale human waste, while winter air cuts through wet clothing like knives. A younger worker nearby notices your expression and laughs. First time smelling honest fabric. Several others chuckle softly. One older fuller, bald beneath a wool cap, shrugs without stopping his work. You get used to it after 10 years. The younger man grins, or your nose dies. Lantern light flickers across exhausted faces. Steam rises faintly from the vats despite the cold rain. Nearby, apprentices haul water buckets while another scrapes mud from wool with a curved iron tool. Some swear fullers develop strange resistance to sickness from breathing such foul air every day. Others claim the work slowly rots the lungs and bends the spine before a man reaches 40. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the trade preserves people through constant exposure or merely teaches them to endure misery quietly. You stand beneath the dripping eaves, listening to the steady slap of feet against soaked cloth. Slap, slap, slap. A rhythm older than memory. The dog settles beside your boots at last, apparently deciding you belong to it now. Martin purchases a mug of weak ale from a nearby stall while the rain thickens over the yard. Beeswax candles flicker inside narrow windows across the street. Somewhere above, shutters bang in the wind. One fuller begins humming softly while he works. Another joins him. Before long the yard fills with low, tired singing that drifts through steam and lantern smoke with strange warmth. Not cheerful exactly, but steady. The kind of sound people make when there's still work left before sleep. You pull your cloak tighter around yourself and feel the long day settling into your bones, while monastery bells echo faintly through the wet medieval night. The singing from the fuller's yard lingers in your ears long after you leave the river street behind. Rain still falls, though softer now, drifting almost lazily through the torchlight while puddles shimmer beneath crooked timber houses. The little dog continues trotting after you with unwavering loyalty despite receiving absolutely no invitation to do so. Martin glances down at the animal. You fed him. No. He shrugs. Then he probably thinks you look equally homeless. The town narrows into winding lanes where upper stories nearly touch overhead. Water drips from laundry lines. Smoke curls from vents cut into steep roofs of damp thatch and slate. Somewhere nearby, someone beats rugs against a wall with astonishing determination for this hour of night. You pass beneath a painted sign showing a sheep beside a pair of giant shears. The smell of wet wool thickens again. More fullers, Martin mutters. The trade fills this district. Everywhere you look, cloth hangs from beams and wooden frames despite the rain, rough undyed wool, deep brown cloaks, faded green hoods, work tunics patched so many times the patches themselves now require patches. A cart rattles past carrying barrels marked with charcoal symbols. Even in darkness you can smell what is inside. Urine again, collected from households throughout the town. Children earn small coins delivering chamber pots to cloth workers. In some places, certain taverns guard their barrels almost like treasure chests. Medieval economies are wonderfully resourceful in ways that make modern noses deeply uncomfortable. Martin leads you into a low alehouse crouched between two workshops. Warmth hits immediately. Smoke hangs thick beneath soot-black rafters, while rushes crunch underfoot across the stone floor. The room smells of wet cloaks, spilled ale, onions, and tired humanity. A woman carrying trenchers of coarse bread squeezes past without spilling a drop despite the crowd. This alone feels worthy of sainthood. You settle onto a bench near the hearth while Martin exchanges a few coins for pottage and ale. The dog circles twice before collapsing beside the fire with a sigh so dramatic it suggests a long personal history of hardship. The Fullers begin arriving not long after. One by one they shuffle into the alehouse wrapped in damp wool cloaks, shoulders bent from labour. Their hands look permanently swollen from cold water and endless work. Several limp slightly. One older man flexes his knees before sitting as though negotiating terms with them. A younger Fuller near the hearth peels off soaked shoes and holds his feet toward the flames. The room immediately objects. Sweet Virgin, preserve us. Groans someone nearby. Your feet smell worse than the vats. The younger man grins proudly. Means I work hard. No, says another Fuller. means Satan abandoned your boots. Soft laughter rolls through the room. You eat slowly while listening to their conversation drift around the fire. They speak of cloth shipments delayed by washed-out roads, of market tolls increasing again, of a priest who supposedly blessed the wrong warehouse and accidentally sanctified 3 pigs in the process. No one can quite agree whether that last story truly happened. Some swear the pigs behaved more respectfully afterward. A fuller across from you notices your interest and raises his mug slightly. Travelling. You nod. Then remember this. He leans closer. Never trust bright white cloth from a cheap merchant. Why, he shrugs. Could be stretched thin, could be poorly fulled, could shrink after one rainstorm and fit only a child or a very ambitious goose. Several men chuckle. The older fuller beside him scratches at grey stubble. Or worse, they rush the cleansing. At this the others nod with serious agreement. You learn quickly that proper fulling takes time. Cloth must be soaked, beaten, stomped, rinsed, stretched, and dried carefully. Impatient merchants constantly demand faster work. Workers constantly resist ruining expensive wool for short-term profit. Rich folk like soft cloaks, says the grey-bearded fuller, but they never ask whose knees stopped working to make them. He says it without bitterness, just exhaustion. The hearth crackles softly while rain taps against shutters outside. Beeswax candles flicker across tired faces and steaming bowls. For a little while the world feels smaller and warmer here. Then the smell from the workers' clothes slowly catches up to the room again. You notice bundles of herbs hanging above the hearth rosemary, sage, lavender, and something bitter Martin calls rue. Many fullers carry little cloth pouches stuffed with herbs or flower petals around their necks in hopes of dulling the constant stench of the vats. Some swear rosemary protects the lungs from foul vapours. Others insist garlic rubbed beneath the nose keeps sickness away. Even now, it is hard to tell whether these remedies truly help or merely give people something hopeful to smell. A serving girl passes carrying more ale, while 2 apprentices near the door quietly argue over whose turn it is to empty collection barrels tomorrow morning. You did East Street last week. You spilled half of it. Because the bucket broke, you dropped it. You pushed me. The serving girl shakes her head. Marry quickly. Both of you. Then you can argue at home instead. The apprentices laugh while the older workers stare into their mugs with the distant expressions of men who once hoped adulthood would involve more sitting down. Outside, the monastery bell rings the late hour. One by one, patrons begin crossing themselves automatically. Time in this world belongs not to clocks but to bells, dawn prayers, market opening, curfew, burial tolls, feast days, warnings of fire. The entire town breathes according to bronze voices echoing over rooftops. Martin eventually stands and stretches with the grimace of a man discovering new pains mid-motion. Come, he says. You can sleep upstairs before the roads freeze. You follow him through a narrow stairwell warped from age and dampness. The upper room holds 6 straw pallets beneath low rafters blackened by years of smoke. Thin wool blankets lie folded at the foot of each bed. A single candle burns beside a shuttered window where rainwater traces silver lines through the glass. The dog climbs onto your pallet before you can object. Apparently negotiations are complete. Below, muted voices continue drifting upward from the alehouse. Laughter rises occasionally, then fades beneath the steady storm outside. Somewhere nearby a baby begins crying. Somewhere farther away wheels clatter over wet stones. Martin removes his boots with visible relief. Fullers have it hard, he murmurs while wrapping himself in a blanket. But wait until you meet the charcoal burners. You glance over. He grins faintly through exhaustion. At least these men still smell partly human. The candle flickers lower. Cold wind slips softly through cracks in the shutters, carrying river mist and smoke into the room. You pull the rough blanket closer around yourself while straw rustles beneath your shoulders. Down in the street, footsteps splash through puddles, then come quieter sounds. A distant horse, a creaking cart, the low murmur of monks chanting somewhere beyond the rooftops, and beneath it all, almost hidden under rain and wind, the endless rhythm of the fullers still working late beside the river. Slap, 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 like the heartbeat of the sleeping town itself. You close your eyes while the warmth of the alehouse settles around you at last, and somewhere in the darkness below, the little dog sighs in its sleep as though even dreams are tiring in medieval Europe. Morning arrives quietly beneath the ceiling of grey cloud and drifting chimney smoke. You wake not to sunlight but to bells, low monastery bells rolling through the damp air beyond the shutters. The sound folds gently across rooftops and narrow streets while somewhere downstairs a servant feeds the hearth with fresh wood. The room smells of smoke, wet wool, and old straw warmed by sleeping bodies. Your blanket has twisted around your legs during the night, and the dog remains curled stubbornly against your boots like a furry tax collector, demanding rent. For several long moments nobody moves. Rainwater taps softly against the shutters. A cart rattles somewhere below. Then Martin groans into existence beside you. "I am too old for stairs," he mutters. "You said that yesterday. I was younger then." The fire downstairs crackles louder as the alehouse slowly wakes. Voices drift upward through warped floorboards. Someone coughs violently. Someone else complains about onions. Medieval mornings begin with astonishingly little optimism. You pull on cold boots and descend into the common room where pale dawn leaks through narrow windows clouded with condensation. The hearth glows orange beneath a hanging iron pot of oat pottage. Steam rises gently through smoky air while sleepy patrons hunch over trenchers of coarse bread. A woman sweeps rushes across the floor with a bundle broom, pushing yesterday's mud and scraps toward the door. Fresh rushes will likely replace them by evening. In many inns and halls the floor covering hides all manner of forgotten things beneath its layers: nutshells, spilled ale, fish bones, wax drippings, fleas, and occasionally objects nobody wishes to identify too carefully. Some swear old rushes carry sickness. Others claim replacing them too often invites bad luck. No one entirely agrees, which feels true of nearly everything in medieval life. You warm stiff hands around a cup of weak ale heated with herbs, while Martin negotiates with a carter heading north toward the forests beyond town. Soon enough you find yourself leaving the gate once more beneath cold morning drizzle. The town behind you fades slowly into mist. Ahead stretches a muddy road lined with bare trees and flooded ditches where ice clings thinly to the edges of standing water. Crows hop across frozen fields searching for anything edible, while distant smoke curls from scattered farmhouses. The carter driving your wagon introduces himself as Odo, though everyone seems to call him Bent Odo because one shoulder sits permanently lower than the other from decades hauling cargo. "Charcoal burners up north," he says, flicking reins lazily. "Strange folk. Strange how," asks Martin. Odo shrugs beneath his cloak. "Live half wild in the woods. Covered in soot. Sleep beside burning earth all year." He spits into the mud thoughtfully. Good charcoal, though. The wagon creaks onward through forest roads slick with wet leaves and horse dung. Bare branches arch overhead while mist drifts low between tree trunks. The deeper you travel into the woods, the quieter the world becomes. Only wheels, hoarse breath, harness chains softly clinking, and now and then the distant knock of an axe somewhere unseen. By midday you begin smelling smoke long before spotting the camp itself. Not hearth smoke, not cooking smoke. Something thicker, earthier. The forest opens suddenly onto a clearing blackened by years of fire. Mounds of turf and soil rise from the ground like enormous sleeping beasts, each trailing thin streams of pale smoke into the cold air. Charcoal pits. Men move silently between them carrying shovels, axes, and bundles of cut wood. Their faces are streaked black with soot. Their cloaks smell permanently burned. Even the snowless ground around the pits appears stained dark from smoke and ash. One charcoal burner glances toward the wagon with tired eyes before returning to his work. Martin mutters under his breath, "Saints preserve us." The camp itself feels half temporary, half eternal. Rough huts made from branches and turf lean beneath dripping pine trees. Firewood stacks tower beside muddy paths. Iron kettles simmer over open flames while strips of smoked fish hang beneath crude shelters to dry. A woman emerges from one hut carrying a child wrapped in wool blankets already stained grey with soot. The child looks entirely accustomed to this existence. You climb from the wagon and immediately feel warmth radiating from the nearest charcoal mound. Beneath layers of earth and turf, wood burns slowly with barely enough air to consume itself fully. The process can take days. Workers must watch constantly for cracks or bursts of flame that might ruin the charcoal inside. One burner approaches carrying a long wooden pole blackened at both ends. "You travellers staying?" he asks. His beard contains enough ash to resemble frost. "Only briefly," says Odo. The burner nods once. "Good." Road south floods by dusk. Everything here feels shaped by weather, smoke, and patience. The workers move slowly but never lazily, checking vents, covering weak spots with damp soil, listening for subtle changes inside the burning mounds. Some swear experienced burners can hear whether charcoal cures properly simply by pressing an ear against the earth. Others say forest spirits whisper warnings through the smoke itself. Even now, it is hard to tell whether these men believe such tales or merely repeat them because life in lonely forests grows strange after enough winters. You walk carefully between pits while smoke curls around your boots. Nearby, two workers repair a collapsed mound with frantic speed, shoveling fresh dirt over glowing cracks where orange fire flickers beneath. "Too much air," one mutters. "Always happens when rain turns." Their hands move with practiced urgency. A ruined charcoal burn means lost days of labour, possibly weeks. One older burner sits near a shelter carving wooden pegs with a small knife. His fingers are permanently stained black. So are the deep lines in his face. He eyes your cleanish cloak. "You from town for now." He nods toward the smoking mounds. "Townfolk hate the smell, but their smiths freeze without us." There it is again. The uncomfortable jobs no one wishes to do, yet everyone depends upon. Without charcoal burners, there are no blacksmith fires hot enough for tools, nails, hinges, horseshoes, weapons, cooking hooks, or iron keys. Entire towns rest upon labour performed deep in wet forests by soot-covered workers. Most people avoid sitting beside. The older burner offers you a piece of dark rye bread and smoked eel. You thank him. He shrugs. Food tastes better outdoors. This is technically true if one ignores the smoke settling onto absolutely everything. As afternoon darkens beneath heavy clouds, you help carry wood toward one of the unfinished pits. Your gloves soon blacken with soot. Smoke clings to your hair and cloak until you begin smelling faintly roasted yourself. The little dog sneezes repeatedly in protest. One worker laughs. Smart creature. Another points toward a cluster of hanging charms near one hut entrance bones tied with red thread beside tiny carved crosses. For bad spirits, he says simply. Do they work? He considers this seriously. We are still alive. Fair enough. Toward evening, the forest grows colder. Mist thickens between trees while the charcoal pits glow faintly beneath their earthen coverings, like hidden dragons sleeping underground. Workers gather near a low fire to eat pottage from wooden bowls. Conversation remains sparse. Forest labour seems to drain unnecessary speech from people. Above the trees, bells from some far-distant abbey drift faintly through the fog. Thin, almost dreamlike. The soot-covered men pause briefly to listen, then quietly continue eating while smoke rises into the darkening medieval sky. Night settles heavily over the charcoal burners' camp. The forest presses close around the clearing while thin smoke drifts between pine trunks and disappears into darkness. Every surface feels touched by soot. Your cloak smells of it now. Your hands too. Even the little dog has acquired grey streaks along its fur after wandering too near the charcoal mounds with reckless curiosity. The workers sleep lightly here. Too much can go wrong in the night. A vent can crack open. Rain can seep into a mound. Wind can feed hidden flames until days of careful burning vanish in an hour. So throughout the darkness, figures move slowly between the smoking hills, carrying lanterns hooded against the wind. You lie beneath rough wool blankets inside a turf shelter, listening to muffled footsteps outside and the soft breathing of strangers asleep nearby. The hut walls leak cold air through every seam. Somewhere above, rainwater drips steadily from pine branches. At some uncertain hour before dawn, shouting breaks through the quiet. Not panic exactly, but urgency. You pull yourself upright while the dog barks once in alarm. Outside, lanterns bob through fog beside one of the larger charcoal mounds where orange light flickers through a fresh crack in the earth covering. More soil, someone calls. Workers hurry forward carrying shovels and wet clay in wicker baskets. Steam hisses upward as damp earth smothers the glowing split. Smoke thickens immediately, bitter enough to sting your throat. A younger burner beside you rubs sleep from his eyes. Happens every winter. You make it sound ordinary. It is ordinary. He yawns. This may be the most medieval answer imaginable. You help pass baskets hand to hand while cold mud seeps through your gloves. The men work steadily without wasted motion. No one shouts dramatically. No one delivers heroic speeches. They simply repair the mound because the work must be done. At last the glow disappears beneath fresh earth. One older burner presses an ear briefly against the mound's side. Better, he murmurs. No one questions him. The camp settles again beneath the dripping forest, though sleep comes slowly afterward. Smoke hangs low inside the hut while distant owls call between trees. The little dog eventually crawls against your side for warmth, carrying the unmistakable scent of damp fur and poor life choices. By morning the rain has stopped. Cold mist rolls across the clearing while pale light filters through branches overhead. Workers already move among the charcoal pits, checking vents with long iron rods. Breakfast consists of hard bread softened in onion broth thick enough to qualify as building material. Martin stares into his bowl. I miss the Fullers. One of the charcoal burners laughs softly. Then you have breathed too much smoke. After eating, you leave the camp with a narrow path leading downhill toward the riverlands beyond the forest. The road twists through dripping trees where frost still clings beneath patches of fern and moss. Your boots crunch over frozen leaves while crows scatter noisily ahead. The world feels washed clean after the smoke-black camp, for perhaps half an hour. Then you begin smelling the river. Not fresh river water, something far worse. Martin notices it too and sighs deeply. Ah, ahead, beyond the trees, stretches another settlement crouched beside slow-moving grey water. Low buildings line the muddy banks while poles hung with drying hides creak in the wind. Thin smoke rises from fires burning beneath large vats. The smell arrives fully now. Rotting flesh, wet fur, old blood, acid, smoke, human sweat. You stop walking instinctively. Tanners, Martin says grimly. The tannery district sits deliberately outside the main town walls for reasons your nose understands immediately. Even the crows here seem resentful. Men and women move between wooden racks covered in stretched hides. Some scrape hair from skins using curved blades. Others stir steaming vats with long poles, while apprentices haul buckets of water from the river. The river itself runs dark beside the workshops. A boy carrying sheepskins nearly slips in the mud and receives a string of curses from an older tanner whose apron appears older than several kingdoms. You continue carefully through the yard. Everywhere there is movement. Scraping, stretching, soaking, hammering. Tanning transforms raw animal hide into leather tough enough for boots, belts, harnesses, gloves, saddles, pouches, armor straps, book bindings, and countless other necessities. Without tanners, medieval life would quite literally fall apart at the seams. Unfortunately, the process is deeply unpleasant. Hides soak first to loosen hair and flesh. Then workers scrape them clean before treating them with mixtures made from bark tannins, stale liquids, oils, and sometimes animal brains depending on local methods. Some vats bubble quietly beside the riverbank. You decide not to ask too many questions about their contents. A tanner with scarred forearms notices your expression. First visit. You nod cautiously. He grins. You stop noticing the smell after a while. Martin mutters, "Everyone says that about terrible things." The tanner laughs hard enough to cough afterward. Nearby, two apprentices scrape a cowhide stretched over a wooden beam. Their hands move rhythmically despite the cold. Scrape. Turn. Scrape again. One of them wears sprigs of juniper tied around his neck with twine. "For sickness, you ask?" He nods. Master says foul air rots the lungs. The older tanner overhears this and shrugs. Foul air rots everything eventually. Comforting philosophy thrives in medieval workplaces. You pass beneath rows of drying leather hanging like enormous stiff banners in the wind. Water drips steadily from the hides into muddy trenches below. A woman nearby rubs oil into finished leather gloves while humming softly beneath her breath. No one can quite agree whether tanners truly carry permanent sickness from their work. Some swear the trade grants strange resistance to plague because workers constantly handle strong chemicals and rotting matter. Others insist tanners die younger than almost anyone except miners and soldiers. Even now, it is hard to tell whether survival here comes from strength or sheer stubbornness. Along the riverbank stands a shallow shrine built into a cracked stone wall. Beeswax candles flicker before a tiny painted saint blackened by smoke and dampness. Saint Bartholomew, Martin says quietly, patron of leather workers. Coins rest beside the candles, so do scraps of leather tied with thread. One tanner crosses himself before beginning work at a vat. Another spits into the river and mutters something about taxes. Medieval spirituality often coexists quite comfortably with ordinary grumbling. The little dog wanders dangerously close to a stretched goatskin and gets chased away by shouting apprentices armed with sticks. "You ruin it, you buy it," one yells. The dog appears unconcerned by this arrangement. Toward midday you shelter beneath an awning while cold wind sweeps across the river. Workers continue labouring despite numb hands and muddy boots. Somewhere nearby someone boils bark in iron kettles to make tanning solution. The smell thickens until your eyes sting slightly. Martin tears coarse bread apart beside you. "You know," he says thoughtfully, "every comfortable lord in silk boots owes his happiness to men standing ankle-deep in this misery." He gestures toward the yard where workers scrape hides beside dark water under a grey winter sky. A bell sounds faintly from the distant town beyond the fields. The tanners barely look up. They simply keep working while smoke drifts over the river and leather creaks softly in the cold medieval wind. By evening the river fog thickens enough to swallow half the tannery yard. Leather hangs motionless in pale mist, while lanterns glow softly through drifting smoke. The smell never truly fades. It simply settles into your clothes with quiet determination, as though planning to accompany you for the remainder of your natural life. You and Martin leave the tanners behind as darkness spreads over the road. Frost begins forming along wagon ruts and dead grass beside the ditches. The little dog trots ahead now and then, vanishing into fog before reappearing moments later, looking deeply pleased with itself. A bell rings somewhere beyond the town walls. Curfew! Wooden shutters close one by one across distant streets. Late travellers hurry through muddy lanes carrying rush torches or tiny horn lanterns that throw weak circles of trembling light over the ground. Martin pulls his cloak tighter. We should find shelter before the gates close. But the road nearest the walls has become crowded with wagons, labourers, and night workers moving beneath the mist. Some haul barrels, others carry tools over their shoulders. One cart rattles past stacked with empty buckets that clank together ominously. You notice several people giving the cart wide space. The smell reaches you a moment later. "Oh," says Martin quietly. Ahead, beneath torchlight near a narrow alley, stand three men wearing heavy gloves and thick leather aprons darkened by long use. Their cart waits beside an open pit covered partially with planks. One worker lowers a rope into darkness. Another lights an extra lantern. The third notices you watching and smirks faintly. "Evening," he says. The word barely survives the smell surrounding him. These are gong farmers, which sounds oddly agricultural until you learn the medieval meaning of gong refers not to bells or music but to privies and cesspits. In simpler terms, these men spend their nights removing human waste from pits beneath houses, monasteries, inns, and alley latrines so entire towns do not slowly drown in their own filth. Civilization rests on surprisingly fragile arrangements. The worker gestures toward the open pit. Stand back unless you want the full experience. You immediately decide you do not. A narrow ladder descends into darkness beneath the planks while the men prepare ropes, buckets, and cloths tied around their mouths. One younger worker mutters a prayer under his breath before climbing down carefully into the pit with a lantern. Martin grimaces, saints preserve him. No saint comes near this work, says the older gong farmer. Yet he crosses himself anyway. The task must be done mostly at night when streets are quieter and fewer respectable townsfolk complain about the smell. Workers empty cesspits into barrels or carts before hauling the waste outside town to dumping grounds or fields, where some farmers later use it as fertilizer. It is exhausting labour. Dangerous too. Pits collapse sometimes. Fumes overcome workers. There are stories of men suffocating below ground while towns above continue sleeping peacefully, entirely unaware. No one can quite agree whether gong farmers earn unusually good wages because of the danger or merely because nobody else wishes to do the work. Some swear the men spend their pay quickly because taverns refuse them service after dark. Others claim they secretly become wealthy through blackmail after hearing too many conversations through privy walls. Honestly, both seem possible. The younger worker emerges from the pit hauling a heavy bucket that sloshes alarmingly. The smell hits like a physical object. The little dog immediately retreats behind your legs with an expression of complete betrayal. One worker laughs through his cloth mask. Smart beast. Nearby, a woman leaning from an upper window shouts downward. "You missed our alley last month." The older gong farmer cups a hand to his ear dramatically. "What?" "You heard me." "We hear many things at work, mistress." Several passers-by snort quietly with laughter. Even here, medieval humour survives. The workers continue steadily, hauling bucket after bucket from the pit while fog curls around lantern light. Their boots sink into frozen mud. Breath steams through cloth masks. Somewhere nearby, a drunk man begins singing badly before vomiting into a gutter with deeply unfortunate timing. One gong farmer points toward him. "See Job's security." Martin nearly chokes laughing. You shelter briefly beneath a gate arch while the workers rest between loads. One removes his gloves and flexes stiff fingers beside a torch. "Worst part isn't the smell," he says unexpectedly. "What is?" "The cold." He rubs cracked knuckles together. Everything freezes in winter. Ropes stiffen, mud hardens. Your hands stop listening to you halfway through the night. Another worker nods agreement, and rich folk always complain if you spill anything. A reasonable complaint, perhaps. Still, there is something strangely human about the scene. The workers share bread beside the cart. They complain about wages and weather. One keeps a tiny carved saint tucked into his belt pouch beside a clove of garlic, supposedly meant to ward off sickness. Some swear garlic protects against foul vapours. Others carry vinegar-soaked cloths over their noses. Even now, it is hard to tell whether these remedies truly help or merely make unbearable work feel slightly less hopeless. As the night deepens, the streets grow quieter. Frost whitens roof edges beneath pale moonlight hidden behind clouds. You pass through narrower lanes where chamber pots occasionally empty from upper windows with little warning. One splash lands nearby. A voice above calls half-heartedly, "Look out below!" Martin sighs, amazing how late they remember manners. The town's poorer districts feel darker after curfew. Fewer lanterns burn here. Doors stay barred. Smoke leaks through roof gaps while dogs bark behind fences of crooked timber. You eventually reach a narrow guest house beside the chapel wall. A painted saint watches from a weathered alcove above the entrance, face nearly erased by rain and soot. Inside, warmth wraps around you immediately. A small hearth glows red beneath hanging kettles. Damp cloaks steam gently near the fire while travellers murmur over mugs of ale. Someone roasts onions. Someone else snores openly on a bench despite the noise around him. The innkeeper eyes your clothes. Tanner's quarter. And charcoal burners, Martin admits. The innkeeper whistles softly. Bold choice. "We are collecting unpleasant experiences." "Well," the innkeeper says while handing over rough wool blankets, "you are succeeding magnificently." You settle near the hearth while outside the bells mark another late hour across the sleeping town. The little dog curls beside the fire instantly, still visibly offended by the evening's discoveries. Beyond the shutters, carts continue creaking faintly through frozen streets as gong farmers work beneath torchlight, unseen by most of the town. Removing filth, clearing pits, keeping sickness and overflow at bay while everyone else sleeps above warm hearths and clean rushes. Work nobody praises openly. Work everyone depends upon. The fire crackles softly while weariness settles over your shoulders like another blanket. Somewhere far off, hidden behind fog and rooftops, You hear a worker laugh in the darkness before the sound fades into the cold medieval night. Morning arrives sharp and white with frost. The guest house windows bloom pale with ice around their edges, while smoke drifts low across the sleeping town outside. Somewhere beyond the chapel wall, monastery bells roll gently through the frozen air, soft as distant waves. You wake slowly beneath rough wool blankets while the little dog stretches beside the dying hearth and yawns with theatrical despair. For a moment the world feels almost peaceful. Then your nose reminds you that your cloak still carries traces of tannery smoke and last night's cesspit road. Medieval travel truly offers unforgettable memories. Downstairs, the innkeeper ladles oat porridge into wooden bowls while muttering about frozen water buckets. Travellers warm stiff fingers around cups of weak ale heated with honey and herbs. The room smells of onions, damp leather, and smoke caught permanently in old beams. Martin studies the frost on the shutters. River workers will suffer today. You follow him outside into streets silvered with thin ice. The town moves cautiously this morning. Wheels crunch over frozen mud. Merchants stomp warmth into their boots while opening market stalls beneath stiff canvas awnings. A butcher hangs pale cuts of pork from iron hooks. Fishwives arrange smoked eel and salted herring across wooden boards already crusted with frost. The cold sharpens every smell. Wood smoke, horse sweat, fresh bread. And somewhere ahead near the riverside, the clean, bitter scent of soap ash. You descend a narrow lane toward the water where women gather beside broad, flat stones along the frozen shallows. Wooden tubs line the bank. Steam rises faintly from kettles hanging over fires, while linen snaps stiffly in the winter wind. The laundresses are already working. Their hands plunge into freezing water again and again without complaint, though their red knuckles suggest the complaint exists privately. Some scrub shirts against boards with coarse soap made from ash and animal fat. Others beat heavy cloth using wooden paddles while frost forms along the hems of their skirts. The river itself moves dark and slow beneath drifting mist. A woman nearby wrings out a wool tunic with enough force to challenge the laws of nature. "You stare like you've never seen washing before," she says. "Not in weather like this." She snorts softly. Dirt does not wait for spring. Fair point. Martin greets an older laundress named Agnes who stands beside steaming kettles, with her sleeves rolled above strong forearms. Her grey hair escapes from beneath a linen cap while she stirs boiling cloth with a long stick. "Still alive?" Martin asks. "Unfortunately." She eyes him carefully. "You smell terrible." "We met tanners." Agnes nods sympathetically. "Ah, that explains why the dog refuses to sit near you." The traitorous animal immediately moves farther away. The work here never truly stops. Inns need clean bedding. Monasteries need washed robes. Wealthier households demand spotless table linens despite living in a world almost entirely composed of mud and smoke. One young laundress kneels beside the river, breaking thin ice with a stick before plunging cloth beneath the surface. "How do your hands survive?" you ask. She shrugs. They mostly don't. She lifts cracked fingers briefly. The skin along her knuckles has split red in several places. Nearby, another woman rubs goose fat mixed with herbs onto swollen hands before returning to work. Some swear goose fat protects skin from freezing water. Others use rosemary oil, vinegar, or warmed ale. Even now, it's hard to tell whether these remedies heal anything or merely comfort people long enough to continue working. A child carries fresh bundles of linen from a nearby cart while geese wander dangerously close to the washing stones. One laundress threatens them with a paddle. "I mean it this time." The geese remain unconvinced. Steam rises around the kettles where sheets boil beside crushed lavender and sage meant to sweeten the smell. Rich households often demand scented linens, especially during winter feasts when halls fill with too many bodies, too much smoke, and not enough bathing. Contrary to certain legends, medieval people do wash. They simply face enormous practical obstacles while doing so. The river wind cuts through every layer of clothing you own. Your fingers ache merely standing nearby. Yet the laundresses continue steadily scrub, rinse, wring, carry, hang. An older woman hums softly while pinning linen to ropes stretched between poles. Another laughs at some private joke while steam curls around her face. The rhythm feels almost peaceful despite the cold. No one can quite agree whether laundresses or fullers suffer more during winter. The fullers at least stand indoors beside steaming vats, but the laundresses spend entire days outside with frozen water biting through cloth and skin alike. Agnes points toward a nearby pile of smooth stones near the riverbank. My grandmother said river spirits live under those. Do you believe her? She also believed onions cure toothaches. That sounds uncertain. Agnes shrugs. The onions sometimes distracted people from the teeth. A surprisingly effective medical philosophy. Beside one fire sits a tiny roadside shrine tucked beneath a willow tree. Beeswax candles flicker weakly before a painted virgin darkened by smoke and weather. Fresh sprigs of rosemary hang beside the image tied with blue thread. A laundress crosses herself before lifting another basket. For protection, you ask? For patience, she replies. Honestly, that may be the greater miracle. By midday, pale sunlight finally pushes through the clouds. Frost melts slowly along the river stones while dripping water turns pathways back into mud. The laundresses barely pause for rest. They eat standing up coarse bread, onions, cold fish wrapped in cloth. One woman stretches her back carefully. You know what the nobility never writes songs about, she mutters. What? Laundry. Another woman laughs. Too dangerous for poets. The little dog discovers a dropped sausage near one of the fires and immediately steals it with astonishing speed. A laundress shouts after him while several others burst into tired laughter. For the first time all morning, the riverbank feels warm. Not physically. The wind still bites hard enough to numb your ears. But there is comfort in the shared labour, the ordinary complaints, the endless small jokes people use to survive difficult work beneath grey winter skies. Cloth flaps softly overhead. Water splashes against stones. Monastery bells drift faintly across the town once more. And beside the slow dark river, the laundresses continue their endless battle against dirt, frost, and the simple reality that medieval Europe produces astonishing quantities of muddy laundry every single day. By late afternoon, the frost has melted entirely, leaving the riverside paths slick once more with grey mud and trampled straw. Linen flaps heavily above the laundresses like pale banners surrendering to the damp wind. Smoke drifts low over the water while carts creak along the road, carrying barrels toward the market square. You and Martin leave the riverbank slowly, carrying the smell of wood smoke and soap ash in your clothes now instead of tannery fumes, which feels like a remarkable improvement by medieval standards. The little dog trots proudly beside you with stolen sausage grease still clinging to its whiskers. The town has grown louder since morning. Merchants shout beneath striped awnings. Blacksmith hammers ring from narrow courtyards. Children weave recklessly between carts while monks in dark robes move through the streets with the calm expression of men who have accepted long ago that humanity is exhausting. The road bends uphill toward a busier district near the market where signs swing overhead in the cold wind painted boots, barrels, candles, sheep, loaves of bread. And above one broad doorway hangs a carved wooden tankard darkened by years of smoke. Martin smiles faintly. Now this, he says, is honest civilization. The alehouse crouches warmly beside the square with glowing shutters and smoke curling thickly from its chimney. Even outside you hear laughter beneath the steady roar of conversation. Inside, warmth wraps around you like a heavy blanket. The common room glows gold beneath beeswax candles and iron lanterns hung from soot-black rafters. Rushes cover the floor thickly enough to soften footsteps. The air smells of roasted onions, ale foam, wet cloaks, and fresh bread carried from nearby ovens. A woman behind the ale barrels notices Martin immediately. "You still owe me 3 pennies." "I owe many people many things," he replies cheerfully. She points toward an empty table. "Sit before I remember your face properly." This is the alewife. Her name is Edith, and she appears capable of carrying 6 mugs at once while simultaneously arguing over coin weights and threatening drunk customers with a ladle. Honestly, kingdoms could likely be run more efficiently by women like Edith. You settle near the hearth while travellers crowd the benches around you. A minstrel near the fire tunes a lute with deeply questionable success. Nearby, merchants debate wool prices, while a pair of sailors complain about river tolls in voices roughened by cold air and cheap drink. Edith moves constantly, pouring ale, serving pottage, breaking up arguments before they fully form, shouting at kitchen boys, checking bread ovens, counting coins, watching everyone. Alewives occupy strange ground in medieval towns. They brew ale, feed travellers, balance accounts, negotiate with suppliers, satisfy inspectors, survive thieves, and occasionally stop fistfights using nothing but tone of voice. Some towns distrust them deeply. Others depend on them completely. No one can quite agree whether alehouses preserve public order by keeping people warm and fed, or destroy it by giving drunk men too much confidence after sunset. Possibly both. Edith slams 2 mugs onto your table. Drink before it cools. The ale is dark, warm, and faintly sweet with honey. Far safer than river water. A kitchen servant passes carrying trenchers piled with stewed cabbage and smoked pork while another sweeps spilled rushes near the hearth. Somewhere behind a curtain, you hear furious whispering followed by a pot crashing loudly enough to silence half the room for a moment. Edith does not even look up. Still alive, she calls calmly. A muffled voice answers yes. Then keep cooking. The room exhales and resumes talking. You notice chalk marks scratched beside the ale barrels. Edith follows your gaze. Town inspectors came yesterday. For taxes. For measures. She rolls her eyes. Every season they check whether taverns water down ale or cheat customers. Do they? Of course. She pauses. Just not enough to get caught. Martin laughs into his drink. Near the hearth sits an old man warming his hands while carving pilgrim badges from scraps of pewter. Tiny saints and crosses hang from strings beside him. Travellers buy them for luck on dangerous roads, though many secretly suspect the badges work mainly by making robbers think you are too poor to bother attacking. A clever system. At the next table, 2 carters argue over whose horse survived worse roads last winter. Mine crossed frozen marshland. Mine fell through frozen marshland. That only proves stupidity. Meanwhile, the minstrel finally begins playing. The tune wanders uncertainly for several moments before discovering where it intended to go. The little dog falls asleep beneath your bench beside a pair of muddy boots belonging to a merchant who smells faintly of garlic and sheep. Edith eventually joins you briefly, rubbing one wrist with visible fatigue. "Long day?" Martin asks. "Always." She nods toward the crowded room. People think alehouses are simple, but miss one delivery and everyone complains. Let the fire die and everyone complains. Raise prices and they complain louder. She glances toward a drunk customer attempting to stand on a bench while explaining theology. And then there's whatever that is. A kitchen boy rushes over carrying a sack of barley. Edith, brewer says the second barrel tastes strange. Strange how? He says sour. She sighs heavily and disappears behind the brewing room curtain like a soldier marching toward battle. Ale brewing itself demands constant labour. Water must boil. Grain must mash properly. Barrels need cleaning. Fires require feeding through the night. Bad ale ruins business quickly and can sicken customers besides. Some swear certain brewers whisper prayers while stirring mash to prevent spoilage. Others hang charms above fermentation barrels. Even now, it is hard to tell whether medieval brewing depends more upon skill, luck, or bargaining quietly with invisible forces. The evening deepens outside while snow begins falling lightly beyond the shutters. Travellers settle closer to the hearth. Cloaks steam gently near the fire. Someone passes around roasted chestnuts while conversation softens into lower murmurs. A monk near the wall quietly copies figures onto parchment by candlelight between sips of ale. His fingers are stained with ink and soot alike. Martin leans back with a contented sigh. You know what makes difficult work bearable? Warmth, he says. Then he considers. And also ale. Edith returns carrying a fresh barrel tap. Brewer fixed it, she announces proudly. Turns out a rat drowned inside. You stare. She shrugs. Could have been worse. Nobody asks how. The minstrel shifts into a slower tune while snow drifts softly outside the glowing windows. Travellers loosen boots near the fire. Someone begins quietly singing along beneath the candlelight. And in the centre of it all, Edith continues moving tirelessly through warmth, smoke, noise, spilled ale, and endless demands, holding the entire crowded room together through sheer exhaustion and stubborn competence while winter gathers beyond the walls. Snow continues through the night in soft drifting waves that hush the town beneath a pale winter silence. By morning the market square lies buried beneath slush and trampled straw, while smoke rises straight upward into still grey air. You wake on a narrow pallet above the alehouse, listening to muffled voices below and the distant tolling of monastery bells somewhere beyond the rooftops. The little dog sleeps upside down beside the hearth ashes downstairs, entirely committed to a life of indoor comfort now that someone else provides the firewood. You and Martin descend into the common room where Edith already argues with a flour merchant over missing sacks. I counted 12. You counted badly. I count for a living. You drink for a living. Both, Edith snaps, and I excel at each. The merchant wisely retreats. Breakfast arrives in thick wooden bowls, oat pottage with onions and scraps of smoked pork floating bravely within it. Outside, carts struggle through muddy snow while apprentices scatter ash over slippery stones. Edith wipes her hands on her apron. Castle kitchens need extra labour today, she says to Martin. Feast tonight. Martin groans sympathetically. Poor souls. She points toward you. You want to see uncomfortable work go below a lord's hall after sunrise. So before long you find yourself climbing the hill toward the keep looming above town, its stone towers rising through winter mist like dark cliffs. Snow clings to the battlements. Guards wrapped in fur-lined cloaks stamp warmth into their boots near the gate, while servants hurry across the courtyard carrying baskets, barrels, and firewood. The castle smells less glamorous than songs usually suggest. Wood smoke, wet horses, boiled cabbage, grease. Too many humans trapped inside thick walls for too many winters. A steward with a face shaped entirely from disapproval leads you through narrow stone passages lit by smoking torches. The deeper you descend, the warmer and louder everything becomes. Then the kitchens hit you all at once. Heat, steam, noise, shouting. The enormous room roars like a furnace beneath black rafters dripping with smoke and grease. Fires blaze beneath giant spits where pigs and geese roast slowly over glowing coals. Copper pots bubble along stone hearths wide enough to sleep inside. Kitchen boys sprint across rush-covered floors carrying trenchers, onions, firewood, and alarming quantities of hot liquid. And among them move the scullions, the lowest workers in the castle kitchens. The forgotten army beneath noble feasts. One scullion kneels beside a tub scrubbing greasy platters with sand and hot water, while another hauls dripping cauldrons nearly larger than himself toward a boiling vat. Their tunics cling damply from steam. Their hands are red and blistered from heat. A cook shouts across the room, "More onions." A scullion vanishes instantly. Another cook points towards stacked trenchers, those cleaned before noon. The nearest scullion closes his eyes briefly in silent despair before returning to work. Martin watches with deep respect. I would rather fight wolves. You weave carefully through the chaos while servants dodge around you carrying trays of bread and baskets of winter apples. Everywhere there is movement. Chop, scrape, boil, wash, carry, repeat forever. The castle feast tonight will likely last only a few hours upstairs beneath candlelight and music. Nobles will praise the roasted meats, sweet pastries, mulled wine, and rich sauces. Almost none of them will think about the exhausted workers sweating below the stone floors beneath their boots. One scullion nearby struggles to lift an iron kettle from the fire. You help him drag it aside before the contents burn. "Thanks," he mutters breathlessly. He cannot be more than 15. "What time did you begin work?" He stares blankly for a moment. "Yesterday." Fair answer. Scullions often rise before dawn to light fires and continue long after midnight cleaning pots, scraping trenchers, hauling water, and preparing the kitchens for another day. The work destroys backs, hands, knees, and tempers with equal efficiency. Some swear kitchen heat keeps workers healthier through winter. Others insist the smoke slowly blackens the lungs and boils the mind. Even now, it's hard to tell whether scullions survive through youth or simply because exhaustion leaves no energy for dying. Near the rear wall stands a mountain of dirty dishes beside tubs of grey water. Two workers scrub endlessly using sand, ash soap, and bits of rough cloth. A girl with flour streaked across her face glances at you. "Don't stand still too long," she warns. "Why?" A cook immediately barrels past carrying a knife large enough to negotiate treaties. You say." She nods knowingly. Above the hearth hangs bunches of rosemary, garlic, and dried lavender tied with twine. Some are meant for cooking. Others supposedly protect food stores from evil spirits and spoilage. No one can quite agree whether kitchen fires attract ghosts more than other places. One old cook firmly believes spirits hide inside cold ovens after midnight. Another claims he once saw a kitchen demon steal sausages during Lent. Honestly, medieval kitchens contain enough smoke and exhaustion to make almost anything seem plausible. You help carry trenchers toward the upper hall where servants prepare for the evening feast. Warm torchlight flickers across stone corridors lined with faded banners and iron sconces. Somewhere above, musicians tune instruments while noble guests arrive wrapped in fur cloaks dusted with snow. Then you descend below again, back into the heat, back into the noise. The contrast feels enormous. Upstairs music, candles, polished goblets. Downstairs steam, blistered hands, onion skins stuck to boots. A scullion nearby sits briefly on an overturned bucket rubbing swollen fingers beside the fire. "Master Cook says nobles want sugared almonds tonight," he mutters. Sounds pleasant. We peeled 300. He stares into the flames. I may never trust almonds again. Another worker overhears and laughs tiredly. Luxury is always someone else's misery. By afternoon, the kitchen grows even hotter. Snowmelt drips from servants' cloaks onto already slick floors, while fires roar beneath fresh cauldrons. The air smells of roasting meat, spilled ale, pepper, cinnamon, smoke, and human exhaustion. The little dog, having followed you somehow through the keep, lies blissfully beside the warmest oven in the castle, surrounded by scandalously generous kitchen scraps. Traitor! At last the monastery bells sound vespers across the town below. For one brief moment several workers pause to cross themselves. Then the shouting resumes immediately. More dishes arrive. More fires need feeding. More platters need carrying upstairs into bright halls where lords and ladies prepare to praise a feast built upon aching backs and endless labour beneath the stone heart of the winter castle. The feast above lasts deep into the night. You know this not because you witness the nobles themselves very often, but because the kitchen never stops moving beneath them. Platters return stripped nearly clean except for bones, grease, and abandoned crusts of bread. Wine spills down staircases. Bells ring for more sauces, more trenchers, more sweet cakes dusted with precious sugar. And below it all the scullions continue working beside roaring fires while snow piles silently against the castle walls outside. At some impossible hour after midnight, you finally leave the kitchens with smoke in your hair and heat still trapped inside your clothes. The cold air outside the keep strikes your face hard enough to feel almost solid. Martin exhales deeply beside you. I can still hear onions. The little dog waddles behind, carrying a stolen sausage nearly half its size. The town below sleeps beneath fresh snow. Rooftops glow pale beneath moonlight leaking through thin clouds, while chimney smoke drifts lazily upward into the frozen sky. Somewhere distant, bells mark the late hour from a monastery tower. You descend carefully through narrow lanes glazed with ice. A drunk nobleman passes riding the wrong direction on a mule while singing a hymn so badly even the mule appears embarrassed. Medieval nightlife has many layers. By dawn the sky lightens into dull silver over frozen fields beyond the town. You and Martin leave the castle roads behind, following a marsh path winding eastward through reeds stiff with frost. Mist hangs low over the wetlands. The world grows quieter with every step. No wagons, no shouting merchants, only wind through dead reeds and the distant croaking of unseen birds hidden somewhere in grey water. Martin pulls his cloak tighter. Hate marshes. Why? Too much squishing. A compelling argument. Ahead. A figure waits beside the water, carrying 2 wooden buckets and a hooked staff. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the belt beneath her heavy cloak, and a linen cloth wraps around her hair against the cold. She introduces herself simply as Beatrice. Leech collector, she says, as though announcing a perfectly ordinary profession, which, unfortunately, it is. In medieval medicine, leeches remain astonishingly popular. Physicians, barber surgeons, monks, healers, and travelling wise women use them for bloodletting, swelling, fevers, headaches, and practically any illness involving too much blood, too little blood, or the general suspicion that the body's behaving incorrectly. And someone must gather them. That someone is often Beatrice. You follow her deeper into the marsh where freezing water glimmers beneath thin sheets of ice. Reeds whisper against one another in the wind while mud sucks greedily at your boots. This is miserable, Martin mutters. Beatrice nods calmly. Yes. She steps directly into shallow black water without hesitation. You stop at the edge. You stand in it. How else would they bite? Another excellent medieval answer. Leech collectors often wade bare-legged through marshes so the creatures attach themselves naturally. Then the collectors remove them carefully and store them in jars or buckets before selling them to healers in nearby towns. It is cold work. Slow work. Work involving intentional interaction with blood-hungry swamp worms before sunrise. The little dog refuses absolutely to enter the marsh and watches from dry ground with visible moral superiority. Beatrice rolls her skirts higher and moves through the reeds patiently while pale water ripples around her knees. Every so often she bends to inspect her legs before plucking away dark wriggling shapes. You get used to it, she says. This phrase appears to govern all uncomfortable medieval labour. You help carry buckets while frost melts slowly beneath weak morning light. The marsh smells of wet earth, moss, stagnant water, and old plants decaying beneath winter mud. Beatrice points toward a cluster of hanging charms tied to a dead willow branch nearby. Bird bones, blue thread, tiny carved crosses. For marsh spirits, you ask. She shrugs, or for luck. Do they help? We are still alive. You have now heard this exact philosophy twice, which feels statistically significant. Some swear marshes hold dangerous spirits that lure travellers into deep mud. Others claim strange lights appear above the water on winter nights, guiding fools away from safe paths. Even now, it is hard to tell whether these tales come from genuine fear or generations of exhausted workers trying to explain why wetlands feel so unsettling after dark. Beatrice eventually kneels beside a frozen pool and breaks thin ice carefully with her staff. Best leeches hide under there. Martin looks horrified. Naturally. You watch her fill glass jars half with marsh water before placing collected leeches inside. The creatures writhe slowly against the glass like tiny black ribbons. Physicians pay well, you ask. Sometimes. Sometimes. She tightens the jar lid firmly. Depends whether their patients survive long enough to settle debts. Comforting economics again. Around midday you shelter beside a small fire built beneath twisted willow trees. Beatrice dries her feet near the flames while brewing bitter herb tea in a blackened kettle. Nearby hangs a leather pouch filled with rosemary, garlic, and dried mint. For sickness, asks Martin. For smell, she says. Fair enough. She tells stories quietly while snowmelt drips from the reeds around you. A monk once bought 50 leeches claiming they cured headaches caused by sinful thoughts. A noblewoman insisted only marsh leeches gathered during a waning moon worked properly for fevers. One physician supposedly paid double for especially hungry specimens. No one can quite agree whether any of this medicine truly works. Some patients recover, some do not. But medieval healers continue balancing herbs, prayers, bloodletting, charms, and desperate hope against illnesses they barely understand. And meanwhile, people like Beatrice stand knee-deep in frozen marshes gathering the slippery tools of those uncertain cures. The afternoon grows dim beneath thickening clouds. Crows wheel overhead while distant abbey bells drift faintly across the wetlands like sounds from another world entirely. You resume walking beside the reed beds where ice cracks softly beneath your boots. Beatrice pauses once beside an ancient stone marker half sunk in mud. Old pilgrims used to drown here, she says. How many? She shrugs. Enough for stories. The wind sighs through the reeds. Far away the town bells ring once more. And across the cold grey marsh, the leech collector continues her patient wandering through water and winter silence, searching the mud for small black creatures that medieval Europe somehow decided were essential to good health. By the time you leave the marshlands behind, evening has already begun slipping quietly across the countryside. The sky fades into layers of dull silver and pale blue above frost-covered fields, while distant smoke rises from cottages tucked among bare trees. Your boots feel heavier now, coated in marsh mud that clings with remarkable emotional commitment. Martin scrapes his soles against a stone. "If I survive winter," he mutters, "I shall never walk anywhere again." You say that while walking. I contain contradictions. The road ahead narrows into an old pilgrim track lined with crooked shrines and weathered oak crosses darkened by rain. Tiny offerings sit beneath several of them, beeswax candles, dried flowers, bits of ribbon, even a crust of bread left for reasons perhaps spiritual and perhaps practical. No one can quite agree whether roadside shrines truly protect travellers. Some swear they keep wolves away. Others say thieves avoid holy markers out of fear. And others quietly insist the shrines mainly comfort frightened people walking dark roads alone. Honestly, that may be miracle enough. The little dog trots ahead through patches of frost while dusk thickens around the fields. Somewhere distant a church bell rings vespers, soft and hollow through the cold air. Then, at last, the abbey appears. Its stone walls rise above the hill through drifting mist, lanterns glowing faintly behind narrow windows. A bell tower stands over clustered roofs blackened by centuries of smoke and weather. Beyond the gate you glimpse gardens buried beneath winter soil, low workshops, and long buildings roofed in slate. Martin exhales with visible relief. "Warm soup," he whispers reverently. A lay brother opens the gate after brief inspection and leads you across the courtyard where snowmelt glistens over worn stones. Monks move silently beneath wool cloaks carrying firewood and lanterns. Somewhere nearby someone chants softly in Latin. The abbey smells wonderfully calm. Smoke, old parchment, bread, wax, damp stone. After the chaos of kitchens and marshes, the quiet itself feels almost unreal. You are shown into the guest house beside a long hall, warmed by braziers glowing red against the cold. Thick oak beams cross the ceiling overhead, while shelves hold candles, pottery, and bundles of dried herbs hanging upside down. And there, near the window beneath a pool of candlelight, sit the scribes. 3 monks bent over wooden desks. Writing, always writing. Their fingers move steadily across parchment while quills scratch softly through the warm hush of the room. Small knives trim feather tips. Ink pots gleam black beside stacks of carefully prepared pages. One scribe rubs his wrist slowly before continuing. Another warms stiff hands above a candle flame. Martin lowers his voice automatically, looks peaceful. The nearest monk glances up with exhausted eyes. It is not. You soon learn that monastery scribes endure discomforts entirely different from charcoal burners or tanners, though no less relentless in their own way. The work destroys backs first, then eyes, then hands. Hours pass hunched over desks in freezing rooms where spilled ink ruins days of labour instantly. Candles cost money, parchment costs more, and mistakes must often be scraped away carefully using knives small enough to shave skin. One older scribe named Brother Anselm flexes cramped fingers, while sand dries fresh ink across the page before him. "You travellers sleep outside sometimes?" he asks. "Occasionally." He nods wistfully. "Lucky." Martin stares. "You would trade this for muddy roads." Brother Anselm gestures toward the manuscript. "I've copied the same sermon 3 times because Abbot Lucian dislikes my lettering. A fair grievance." The manuscript itself glows beautifully beneath candlelight. Red and blue painted initials curl across creamy parchment beside delicate illustrations of saints and vines. Yet every page represents hours of painstaking labour and absolute silence. Mostly, except for Brother Cedric near the far wall, who sneezes every 20 minutes with terrifying force because powdered pigments irritate his nose. No one even looks up anymore. You sit beside the hearth while a younger novice grinds fresh ink using soot, oak gall, and wine vinegar. His fingertips are permanently stained black. Can it wash off, you ask? Eventually? How eventually? He studies his hands, perhaps after death. Around the room stand curious objects gathered through centuries of monastery life-wax tablets, reed pens, leather-bound psalters, polished bone rulers, saints' relics sealed inside tiny silver boxes. One relic, a yellowed finger bone inside crystal, rests beside the window. Brother Anselm notices your glance. Saint Gerbold. What did he do? The monk shrugs. No one fully agrees anymore. Apparently even sainthood sometimes suffers from poor record-keeping. The monks continue writing as darkness deepens outside the abbey walls. Candles flicker across bent shoulders and weary faces. Snow taps softly against narrow windows while the bell tower marks the passing hours above. Some swear scribes slowly lose their sight from staring at parchment by weak candlelight. Others claim years of copying holy texts strengthen the soul enough to endure bodily suffering. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the monks continue through devotion, habit, or simple inability to imagine another life. Brother Cedric sneezes again violently. A novice mutters, "Saints preserve the ink." The older monks ignore him completely. Later, you follow Brother Anselm into the manuscript chamber where finished books rest chained to shelves beneath thick dust and candle smoke. The room smells wonderfully ancient leather, beeswax, dry parchment, and cold stone. These books survive fires, he says quietly. Wars too sometimes. He runs tired fingers along a binding. People think copying words is peaceful work, but the cold reaches your bones, your neck stiffens, your eyes blur. Winter candles fail early, and if you make one mistake... He sighs deeply. You begin again. Nearby hangs a tiny charm made from rowan wood in blue thread. For protection, you ask. Brother Anselm looks mildly embarrassed. Against ink spills? Does it help? We are still alive. Again that answer. Perhaps all medieval workers eventually reach the same conclusion. The abbey bell rings Compline through the cold night. Monks drift quietly toward prayer while candles dim one by one across the writing hall. You settle near the guest house hearth wrapped in wool blankets while snow falls softly beyond the shutters. The little dog sleeps curled beside warm ashes. Somewhere nearby, monks chant low evening prayers that echo faintly through the stone corridors like distant river water. And beneath the glow of final candles, the scribes continue scratching careful lines onto parchment with aching fingers and burning eyes, preserving words through winter darkness, one patient stroke at a time. Morning inside the abbey arrives gently, not with shouting or clattering carts, but with bells rolling through stone corridors before dawn while darkness still presses against the windows. Somewhere nearby, monks chant morning prayers in low measured voices that drift through the cold like smoke. You wake beneath heavy wool blankets feeling almost warm for the first time in days. Almost? The guest house hearth still glows faintly beneath white ash, while pale blue light gathers slowly outside. The little dog remains asleep with complete moral confidence, stretched across the warmest section of floor as though born to monastic luxury. Martin sits upright already, staring into a cup of steaming herb broth. "I dreamed about onions," he says quietly. "The castle kitchens affected you deeply. They changed me. A lay brother brings coarse bread, hard cheese, and a small pot of honey before disappearing silently back into the corridor. Monasteries feed travellers because charity demands it, though judging by the expressions of certain monks, charity occasionally demands patience as well. Soon afterward you leave the abbey behind beneath a sky the colour of old pewter. Frost silvers the fields beyond the walls while smoke rises from distant cottages scattered across the hills. The road north winds between frozen hedgerows and winter pasture where sheep graze miserably through thin crusts of snow. The world feels wide and empty after the crowded town. Only wind, crows, and the crunch of frost beneath your boots. You walk for hours beneath pale sunlight that never truly warms the air. Noon passes quietly. Once you stop beside a roadside shrine where someone has left dried apples beneath a painted saint, almost erased by weather. Martin eyes the offering. You think saints mind if travellers borrow things? Probably. He leaves the apples alone, though clearly not without effort. Toward afternoon you spot movement across the fields ahead. A shepherd. He stands atop a low ridge wrapped in a heavy wool cloak lined with rough fur. Around him drift dozens of sheep moving slowly through frost-bitten grass, while two lean dogs circle the flock with professional suspicion toward the entire universe. A bell tied around the neck of one ram clinks softly through the cold air. The shepherd raises a hand as you approach. "You lost?" "Not yet," says Martin. The shepherd nods as though this is temporary. His name is Willem. His beard carries traces of frost, and his boots appear stitched together from older boots that themselves once required stitching. Beside him stands a crooked staff polished smooth from years of use. The sheep smell exactly as sheep always smell. Warm, damp, faintly disappointed. Willem watches the flock constantly while speaking, eyes tracking movement across the field with quiet instinct. "Sheep wander," he says simply, "especially the stupid ones." "How do you tell which are stupid?" He gestures broadly toward all of them. "Fair enough again." Shepherding appears peaceful from a distance. Songs love shepherds. Paintings adore them. But standing here in the freezing wind beside half-frozen pasture, you begin noticing the reality beneath the poetry. The cold never leaves. Not really. Willem spends entire days outdoors through rain, snow, mud, and bitter wind while guarding animals determined to wander into rivers, thorn bushes, or occasionally off cliffs if given enough enthusiasm. "You sleep outside too, you ask?" "Sometimes." He points toward a small shelter of stone and turf near the ridge. When lambing starts, almost always. The shelter barely qualifies as architecture. Smoke leaks through gaps in the roof while old straw lies piled beside the entrance. Inside smells of sheep wool, damp earth, and smoke trapped over many winters. Some swear shepherds develop sharper hearing from listening constantly for wolves or distressed animals in darkness. Others claim loneliness slowly changes people who spend too much time in open fields speaking mainly to dogs and sheep. Even now, it is hard to tell whether Willem enjoys the solitude or simply learned long ago how to live beside it. The little dog attempts proudly to help herd sheep for approximately 30 seconds before becoming completely overwhelmed by sheep existing in multiple directions simultaneously. Willem's older sheepdog watches this failure with visible contempt. You walk with a shepherd across the pasture while bells clink softly around the flock. The wind smells of frost, wool, and distant chimney smoke drifting from unseen farms. Willem carries small charms braided into the leather strap around his wrist. Red thread. Tiny iron nails. A wolf tooth. For protection, you ask. Storms, he replies. He glances toward the grey clouds gathering low in the west. My mother swore iron turns bad weather. Does it? We are still alive. There it is again. Perhaps medieval Europe survives entirely through stubborn repetition of uncertain optimism. As evening approaches, the temperature drops sharply. Frost spreads across the pasture in silver veins while sheep cluster closer together against the wind. Willem checks several animals carefully for signs of sickness or injured hooves. Lose many during winter, Martin asks quietly. The shepherd shrugs. Enough. He says it without drama. Just fact. A younger shepherd from a neighbouring field arrives carrying a bundle of firewood over one shoulder. He greets Willem with the tired familiarity of men who spend long months exposed to weather together. Fox got 3 hens near the river, he says. Same fox. Unless foxes organise themselves unusually well. The younger man notices you watching the flock. People think shepherds sleep all day beside trees playing pipes. Willem snorts softly. Those shepherds own imaginary sheep. They laugh quietly while building a small fire beside the stone shelter. Sparks drift upward into the freezing dusk. Bread warms near the flames while sheep settle across the hillside like pale stones beneath the growing darkness. Above you, the first evening star appears through the clouds. Then bells drift faintly across the fields from some distant chapel hidden beyond the hills. Soft. Lonely. Beautiful. The shepherds remove caps briefly at the sound before returning to their meal. No one speaks for a while afterward. Only the fire crackles. Dogs breathe beside the flames. Sheep bells answer the wind out in the darkness. And somewhere beneath thick cloaks and weary silence, the shepherds continue their endless winter watch across the frozen medieval fields, while night slowly closes around them. The night beside the shepherd's fire passes slowly beneath a sky heavy with stars. Cold settles over the hills in layers so deep it feels ancient. Frost creeps across the edges of blankets while sheep huddle together beyond the shelter, their bells chiming softly now and then through the darkness. The fire crackles low beside Willem and the younger shepherd, whose name turns out to be Thomas. No one speaks much after midnight. There is only wind, and the occasional suspicious bark from the dogs whenever shadows move too strangely along the ridge. At one point, the little dog attempts bravely to bark alongside them before immediately frightening itself with the sound. Willem does not laugh outright, though his beard shifts suspiciously. You drift in and out of sleep listening to the slow rhythm of the flock. Somewhere far away an owl calls. Somewhere farther still, bells from a monastery drift faintly through the frozen air like sounds remembered from another lifetime. By dawn the fire has collapsed into red coals beneath white ash. The shepherds rise immediately. No lingering. No luxurious stretching. The sheep already move restlessly through the frost while pale mist crawls low across the hills. You stamp feeling back into your feet while Thomas checks a lame ewe near the stone wall. Willem shares hard bread softened in hot broth thickened with barley. Road east goes toward the mining hills, he says between bites. Martin groans quietly. Wonderful. Apparently he has heard enough stories already. You leave the pasture shortly after sunrise while the shepherds guide their flock toward lower grazing grounds. Sheep bells fade slowly behind you beneath the pale winter sky. The road changes as you travel eastward. Fields vanish first, then farms, then even the trees begin thinning across rocky hills streaked with patches of snow and black stone. Smoke rises ahead in strange uneven columns from narrow chimneys scattered across the slopes. Mining country. The air itself feels different here. Sharper somehow. Metallic. You pass carts creaking downhill loaded with broken stone while tired ponies strain against harnesses stiff with frost. Men trudge beside them carrying picks, shovels, and lanterns blackened by soot. Few talk much. Most simply walk. The mining settlement crouches against the hillside beneath clouds of smoke and drifting dust. Timber supports brace narrow tunnel entrances disappearing directly into the earth. Nearby stand rough huts roofed with sod and warped planks, their windows clouded by grime. A bell hangs near the largest shaft entrance. Not for prayer. For cave-ins. Martin stares at it uneasily. "You know," he says softly, "I miss the laundresses." Miners move constantly through the camp hauling ore baskets, sharpening tools, feeding furnace fires, and coughing into wool sleeves. Their faces appear permanently dusted grey, some limp slightly, others wrap cloth around swollen wrists before returning underground. One older miner warming his hands beside a brazier eyes your cloaks. Travellers. For now. He nods toward the tunnels. Won't stay travellers long down there. Comforting welcome. His name is Harlan, and after brief negotiation involving bread and hot ale, he agrees to show you the lower workings before midday. You immediately question this decision. The mine entrance yawns black beneath thick timber beams slick with frost. Lanterns flicker weakly against damp stone while cold air breathes steadily from the darkness below, like the mine itself sleeping uneasily. Inside, the world narrows. Low tunnels force you to duck beneath dripping rock. Water trickles constantly through shallow channels cut into the floor. Wooden supports creak softly overhead, with sounds you would very much prefer not to hear. The deeper you descend, the warmer and more suffocating the air becomes. Miners labour by lantern light in cramped chambers barely tall enough to kneel inside. Picks strike stone rhythmically through the darkness. Clang, clang, clang. A boy no older than 14 drags an ore basket through mud behind you while coughing into his sleeve. Another worker wedges iron tools into cracks along the rock face before hammering them loose with steady, brutal force. The work here devours bodies. Backs bend permanently. Lungs fill with dust. Hands split open despite leather gloves. And always there remains the weight of the mountain overhead. Some swear miners age faster underground because sunlight forgets them. Others claim the earth itself steals years little by little from anyone foolish enough to dig too deeply. Even now, it's hard to tell whether the true danger comes from collapse, sickness, exhaustion, or simply spending too much of life beneath stone. Harlan leads you through a tunnel so narrow your shoulders brush both walls. Silver Vein used to run here, he says. Used to. Ran out. There is sadness in the way he says it. Entire settlements rise and fall depending on what lies hidden underground. When ore disappears, people often vanish with it. You pass tiny shrines carved directly into the tunnel walls, crude saints blackened by soot, tiny crosses, candles protected beneath iron cages. For luck, asks Martin quietly. Harlan nods. And cave-ins. Do they help? The miner shrugs. We are still alive. The phrase follows you everywhere now like another travelling companion. Farther below, the tunnel widens into a chamber where several miners rest beside barrels of water and stale bread. Their faces gleam with sweat despite the cold season above ground. One man rubs his knees painfully. Another stares into lantern flame with exhausted emptiness. A third sharpens a pick while humming softly under his breath. No one hurries. Underground work teaches patience because stone refuses negotiation. You notice small birds in wicker cages hanging near one shaft. Harlan follows your gaze. Birds die before men when air turns bad. The silence afterward feels very long. Water drips steadily somewhere in darkness beyond the lantern glow. A distant hammer echoes faintly through the tunnels. Martin clears his throat. Perhaps we should return upward before the mountain develops opinions about us. Harlan actually smiles at that. The climb back toward daylight feels endless. Your legs ache. Your lungs burn slightly from dust and stale air. Yet the miners descending past you barely react. Just another day. Another shift. Another journey beneath the hill. When you finally emerge outside, cold winter wind strikes your face with shocking sweetness. Smoke drifts across the camp while snowflakes begin falling lazily from thick grey clouds overhead. The little dog, wisely left above ground, greets you as though rescuing survivors from war. Nearby, miners already prepare fresh lanterns for the next descent. The bell above the shaft sways gently in the wind. And beneath the frozen hillside, countless workers continue digging through darkness and stone, chasing silver veins deeper into the earth while the long medieval winter gathers around them once more. Snow falls steadily across the mining settlement through the afternoon, turning black mud into pale slush that clings stubbornly to boots and wagon wheels alike. Smoke from the smelting fires drifts low over the hillside while miners disappear one by one into narrow tunnels carrying lanterns that glow briefly before the darkness swallows them whole. You and Martin leave the camp before dusk. "Too many holes in the ground for my liking," he mutters. The little dog sneezes black dust from its nose with deep personal resentment toward the mining profession. The road westward slopes gradually toward lower country, where scattered farms reappear beneath drifting snow. By evening the sky clears enough for weak moonlight to silver the frozen fields. Somewhere distant, bells ring across the countryside again, patient and familiar. You sleep that night in a drafty barn beside a cartmaker's family who trade warmth for help carrying firewood. The hay smells sweet after days of smoke and marsh water. Mice rustle invisibly in the corners. Wind hums softly through gaps in the boards overhead. Compared to the mine, it feels luxurious. Morning arrives with brighter skies and sharper cold. Frost crusts every fence post and wagon rut while crows gather along the road, waiting for travellers careless enough to drop crumbs. The closer you move toward the next town, the busier the roads become. Carts loaded with apples, barrels of ale, bundles of wool, live chickens loudly protesting civilization, and among all this movement walk the porters, bent beneath impossible loads. A market town rises ahead around midday, surrounded by low stone walls and smoke drifting from dozens of chimneys. Even before reaching the gates, you hear the market itself, merchants shouting prices, livestock bleating, hammering from smithies, wheels rattling over frozen ground. Inside the walls, the streets churn with winter trade. Stalls crowd every square beneath patched awnings. Fishwives wave smoked herring at passing customers. Bakers display dark rye loaves still steaming from ovens. Fur merchants hang pelts beside candles and iron tools, while children weave recklessly between carts carrying baskets larger than themselves. And through all of it move the porters. Some carry barrels strapped across their backs with leather harnesses. Others balance crates on shoulders wrapped in thick cloth padding. One man pushes a handcart stacked with sacks nearly taller than he is. Everywhere bent backs, bent knees, bent lives. Martin steps aside as a porter squeezes past hauling 2 casks of salted fish. "That man carries more than my horse." The porter overhears without slowing. Horse gets oats. Fair criticism. You follow the flow of the market toward the central square where labourers gather beside warehouses and counting houses waiting for work. Porters compete constantly for loads from merchants arriving through the gates. The strongest workers earn first. The oldest often wait longest. One porter sits on an overturned barrel rubbing his shoulder beneath a patched wool cloak. His name is Peter, and his spine curves slightly from years carrying cargo through muddy streets. Best day, he says after you ask about the work. Dry weather. And worst. He gestures around him broadly. Winter. Naturally. Snow turns to mud. Mud freezes into ruts. Wagons stick. Loads grow heavier when wet. Meanwhile, merchants still demand speed because spoiled goods mean lost coin. A warehouse bell rings nearby. Immediately, several porters rise and hurry toward an arriving grain cart. Peter stands slower than the others. Young backs move faster. Still, he joins them. You watch workers shoulder enormous sacks one after another, trudging through slush towards storage sheds while clerks scratch numbers onto wax tablets nearby. None of the merchants lifting those quills appear remotely tempted to help carry grain themselves. Some swear porters develop extraordinary strength from years beneath heavy loads. Others claim the work simply destroys bodies before old age can fully arrive. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the strongest men survive because of the labour or despite it. The market smells wonderfully alive compared to the mines. Roasting chestnuts, wet wool, fresh bread, a la foam, wood smoke, and underneath everything, the familiar scent of muddy humanity crowded too closely together. You help Peter guide a wine barrel through the square while snow begins falling lightly again. The barrel weighs enough to make your shoulders complain immediately. Peter notices. You feel it tomorrow? I already feel it now. He laughs softly. Good. Means your bones still speak. Around the market stand little shrines tucked into corners between shops and alleyways. Candles flicker before painted saints, while merchants leave coins hoping for profitable trade and safe journeys. Porters leave offerings too sometimes, usually for strong knees. One worker wears a tiny iron horseshoe tied around his neck with leather cord. For luck, you ask. For my back. Does it help? He shrugs. We are still working. There it is again. The unofficial prayer of exhausted medieval labourers everywhere. By midday, snow thickens over the square. Apprentices scatter fresh straw onto slippery ground while town criers shout news no one fully listens to. A pig escapes somewhere near the butcher stalls, causing brief chaos and one very dramatic fall involving cabbages. Even Peter smiles at that. You shelter briefly beneath a cloth awning where vendors sell hot onion broth from steaming kettles. Nearby, two porters argue over payment from a spice merchant dressed far too warmly for a man who carries nothing heavier than coins. You promised 4 pennies. I promised 3. You promised 4 before witnesses. The merchant sighs heavily. Everyone becomes a lawyer near market day. Behind them, bells ring from the town hall tower while snow gathers along rooflines and awnings. The square remains crowded despite the weather because trade never truly pauses. Winter simply makes everything harder. A young porter slips in slush while carrying pottery crates. The entire market gasps. Miraculously, nothing breaks. Several people cross themselves automatically. That may qualify as divine intervention. Toward evening, torches flare to life around the market while shutters close against the cold. Porters continue hauling final loads into warehouses before nightfall. Their boots leave deep tracks through slush mixed with straw and horse dung. Peter pauses beside the gate while flexing stiff fingers. People remember merchants, he says quietly, not the men carrying their goods. Beyond him the market glows warm beneath torchlight and drifting snow. Bells echo faintly through the darkening streets while workers vanish one by one into taverns, alleys, and rented rooms above the warehouses. And across the winter square the porters continue bending beneath barrels, sacks, crates, and every other burden medieval life demands, carrying comfort on their backs for people too wealthy to lift it themselves. Snow melts into freezing rain overnight. By dawn, the market town has transformed into a world entirely composed of dripping roofs, grey puddles, and disappointed chickens. Water runs through the gutters in narrow brown streams while merchants curse beneath awnings heavy with rain. You wake above a warehouse beside the square where sacks of grain line the walls and every blanket smells faintly of dust and damp wool. Somewhere below, porters already shout to one another in the rain while wagon wheels grind through mud outside. Martin peers through the shutter cracks. I preferred snow. You complained about snow yesterday. Yes, he says solemnly, but now I have perspective. The little dog refuses absolutely to leave the blanket pile until bribed with sausage crusts. Down in the market square, rain turns straw underfoot into slippery paste. Vendors struggle to protect their goods beneath patched canvas while smoke from cooking fires hangs low and stubborn in the wet air. Yet even in this weather the dyers work. Their quarter lies near the river beyond the main market, where long sheds crouch beside steaming vats and lines of hanging cloth sway gently through the mist. You smell the place before reaching it. Sharp vinegar, wet wool, smoke, and something bitterly metallic underneath. Bright colours begin here in surprisingly miserable conditions. The dyer's yard glows strangely against the grey morning. Strips of crimson, blue, yellow, and green cloth hang beneath covered racks like captured fragments of sunlight. Steam curls upward from enormous vats, while workers stir the liquids with long wooden poles. One dyer lifts dripping cloth from a vat so blue it hardly seems real beneath the rain-dark sky. Martin stares. That cannot be healthy. Probably not. A woman carrying baskets of dried plants overhears him. It definitely is not. Her name is Isabel, and her hands are stained deep reddish-brown despite vigorous washing. The stains have settled into the cracks of her skin permanently over years of labour. She gestures toward the steaming vats. Mind your sleeves unless you want blue elbows for a month. The work here balances somewhere between craft and controlled disaster. Different colours require different ingredients woad for blue, madder root for red, weld for yellow, crushed insects for certain scarlets wealthy nobles adore. And then come the mordants. Alum, urine, lye, metal salts, various alarming substances no sensible person wishes near bare skin. Yet dyers handle them daily while standing ankle-deep in muddy water beneath smoke-blackened rafters. You follow Isabel beneath one of the sheds where apprentices feed fires under boiling vats. Steam thickens the air until breathing feels almost chewable. Wet cloth slaps against wooden tables while workers wring out heavy fabric using iron hooks and pure stubbornness. Everywhere there are stains. Blue arms, yellow fingertips. Red splashes cross aprons. One apprentice sneezes bright yellow onto his sleeve and sighs with complete resignation. Weld again, asks another worker. Weld again. Apparently this happens often. Some colours cost fortunes. Deep blue especially carries prestige because proper dyeing takes skill, time, and enormous quantities of woad leaves fermented into pungent paste. The smell during preparation is infamous. Martin discovers this firsthand near the fermentation sheds and nearly walks backward into a barrel. Saints defend us, he coughs. Isabel grins. That means it's working. No one can quite agree whether dyers or tanners smell worse. The argument appears eternal. You watch workers lower cloth carefully into steaming vats using long poles. Timing matters enormously. Too little dye and colours fade quickly. Too much heat ruins fabric entirely. One older dyer named Colin squints into a vat with the concentration of a battlefield commander. Blue is moody, he mutters. How can a colour be moody? You will know when it betrays you. This explanation satisfies everyone except logic. Some swear certain dyers guard secret colour recipes passed through generations. Others insist rival workshops attempt theft by bribing apprentices or spying through windows after dark. Even now, It is hard to tell whether the finest colours come more from chemistry, luck, or superstition. Near the rear wall hangs bunches of herbs tied beside tiny charms carved from bone and rowan wood. For protection, you ask. Isabel nods immediately. Against spoiled dye? What causes spoiled dye? Rain, cold, bad barrels, evil spirits, careless apprentices. The nearest apprentice looks wounded. A bell rings somewhere through the rain beyond the sheds, while workers continue stirring vats beneath clouds of steam. Outside, coloured water runs through muddy channels toward the river in narrow streams of red and blue. One dyer lifts green cloth into pale daylight and curses softly. Too dull. What happened? Winter happened. He tosses the cloth back into the vat. The work ruins hands almost as badly as laundresses' labour. Chemicals crack skin. Hot water blisters fingers. Steam burns faces when vats bubble unexpectedly. Yet despite all this, there is undeniable beauty here too. Bright cloth hanging against grey skies. Scarlet threads drying beside misty riverbanks. Blue sleeves glowing beneath torchlight. Entire medieval courts drape themselves in luxury born from muddy yards filled with exhausted workers and dangerous fumes. Isabel hands you a scrap of dyed wool still warm from the vat. Careful, she says, that stain never leaves. You believe her immediately. Around midday the rain eases slightly into drifting mist. Workers finally pause long enough to eat bread and smoked fish beneath the sheds, while steam curls upward around them. Colin rubs aching shoulders beside the fire. You know what nobles say when they see bright cloth, he asks. What? They say, beautiful. He gestures round the muddy steaming yard. No one says, what terrible weather these poor fools endured boiling roots all winter. The others laugh softly. A young apprentice nearby accidentally knocks over a bucket of red dye. Silence falls. Everyone stares. The apprentice closes his eyes briefly as though preparing spiritually for death. Isabel finally sighs. At least it missed the finished wool. The entire shed exhales together. Outside, evening begins settling over the river through pale fog and weak torchlight. Coloured cloth sways gently beneath dripping awnings while bells echo faintly from the market square behind you. Steam rises into the cold damp air. Fires crackle beneath the vats. And through smoke, stains, and endless winter rain, the dyers continue transforming dull wool into brilliant colour for a world that rarely notices the aching hands behind beauty. Night returns softly over the riverside town. Rain fades at last into mist drifting low above the streets, while torchlight glows amber against wet stone and puddled mud. The market square quiets little by little as merchants shutter stalls and weary labourers disappear into alleys, taverns, workshops, and narrow rooms tucked beneath crooked roofs. You leave the dyer's quarter with faint blue stains still lingering across your fingertips. Martin notices immediately. There, he says, now you look employed. The little dog trots ahead proudly through the mist as though personally responsible for guiding the entire journey. The roads have grown quieter now, not empty, never entirely empty, but gentler. A cart creaks somewhere beyond the chapel lane. Bells sound the late hour from a distant monastery tower. Smoke drifts from chimneys carrying the familiar scents that have followed you through this long winter wandering peat fires. Damp wool, onions softening in iron pots, bread crusts warming beside coals. The world feels smaller tonight. Softer too. You pass beneath rows of shuttered houses where candles flicker faintly behind waxed cloth windows. Somewhere inside, a laundress finally rests her cracked hands beside the fire. Somewhere a scullion scrapes the last grease from trenches beneath castle kitchens. Somewhere charcoal burners still walk slowly between smoking mounds deep in the forest, while snow gathers silently on black earth. And beneath another roof, perhaps near a frozen pasture, a shepherd listens for wolves while sheep bells answer the wind. The uncomfortable jobs never truly sleep. They only quiet for a few hours before dawn calls them back again. You and Martin follow the road beyond the town walls where the mist thickens over open fields silvered faintly by moonlight. Frost begins forming once more along the edges of puddles and dead winter grass. Ahead, beside a stand of bare willow trees, glows a small roadside fire. Travellers already sit around it wrapped in cloaks and blankets. A carter warms his boots near the flames while a woman stirs pottage in a black kettle hanging above the coals. Sparks drift lazily upward into the dark. No one asks many questions when you join them. Medieval roads teach people the quiet courtesy of shared warmth. You settle onto a log beside the fire while heat slowly reaches stiff fingers and tired knees. The little dog curls instantly against your boots with a sigh of total contentment. Around you, conversation drifts softly through the cold night. A merchant complains about frozen wagon wheels. A pilgrim speaks of flooded bridges farther south. Someone mentions hearing wolves near the northern hills. Someone else insists they were only dogs. No one fully agrees. The flames crackle gently while smoke rises through the bare branches overhead. You realize how many sounds have accompanied this long wandering through uncomfortable medieval lives. The slap of fullers' feet in steaming vats. The hiss of charcoal smoke beneath wet earth. The scrape of tanners' blades along soaked hides. The clatter of cesspit buckets in midnight alleys. The splash of frozen river water around laundresses' hands, the roar of castle kitchens, the dripping silence of mine tunnels, the creak of porters beneath heavy loads, all of it still echoes quietly somewhere behind you now like memories carried on winter wind. Martin stares into the fire for a long while before speaking. You notice something strange. What? Everyone complains. That is not strange. No, he says softly, but they keep working anyway. The firelight flickers across tired faces around the roadside camp. The laundress keeps washing. The miner keeps digging. The gong farmer walks the freezing streets. The scribe bends once more over candlelight and parchment. Again and again. Not because the work is noble every moment. Not because life becomes easy. But because winter comes regardless, roads flood regardless, people still need bread, leather, cloth, candles, horseshoes, clean water, warm cloaks, and fires burning against the cold. Civilization itself rests quietly upon aching backs. The wind softens. Somewhere far off, bells ring one final time across the sleeping countryside. The travellers near the fire begin settling into blankets and cloaks. One by one, conversations fade into softer murmurs, then silence. Only the kettle continues bubbling gently above the coals. You lean back against your pack and look upward. The clouds have finally broken apart. Stars spill across the dark sky above the frost-covered fields, steady and cold and impossibly distant. The same stars shine over monastery towers, over muddy towns, over frozen rivers and charcoal camps and silent sheep pastures. And under them all, scattered across the medieval world, countless workers sleep for a few brief hours before morning bells call them once more into cold streets and difficult labour. The fire burns lower. Orange coals settle softly beneath pale ash. The little dog twitches once in its sleep beside you, perhaps dreaming of stolen sausages and warm kitchens. Nearby, someone pulls a wool blanket tighter against the cold. No one speaks anymore. The road itself seems to rest at last beneath the quiet winter sky. And slowly, gently, the world begins fading into stillness. The muddy roads disappear first into darkness, then the distant bells, then the smoke drifting above hidden rooftops, until all that remains is the warmth of the fire against your hands, the soft breathing of sleeping travellers nearby, and the comforting sense that somewhere beyond the dark fields, life continues quietly onward through candlelight and snow. The embers dim, the wind softens further, and the long medieval night finally folds itself around you like a heavy wool blanket, patient and calm and endlessly old. Sleep comes slowly now, warmly, without hurry, as though the whole weary world has decided at last to rest.